Looking for the captions. Yeah, I don't see it. There we go. Slide that over. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sharon, for that wonderful introduction. And, first thing I'd like to say is it's so great to be back in person after being shut down for 2 years for so many events, and to be able to talk to people live in person and not on screen. I do have to worry about having on pants, no more pajama bottoms for speaking, but now you guys get to see me in full and live in person. One of the things I like to talk about is how we approach product at our company as a lead-in. So every time we get a new group of employees, one of the things that I like to do is have a conversation with them about how they think we can help small businesses. And a lot of times we'll talk a lot about technology and what we can do with technology to help small businesses. And it just so happens about a year and a half ago, I had a group in and we were having this conversation and they were really engaged. And we started to talk about principles that make for products that people love. And so we go through all of these principles, and I put these up here just so you guys can see some of the things that we discussed. And we kept coming back to creating experiences for real people. Knowing that small businesses are run by real people, people who have a mission, people who oftentimes want to serve their community and not just make a profit. They want to make a profit, but a lot of times the reason they started this small business was because they saw a need in their community. And as we went through this conversation, it allowed me to really engage in things that I really am passionate about: workshop facilitation, small businesses. But in this particular conversation, the thing that came up over and over again was accessibility. Now, this happened because this group of employees that we hired just so happened to be very passionate about accessibility themselves. And as they kicked out their ideas and they broke into the groups, I wandered around the space that we were in digitally, looking at their suggestions. And what kept coming back to me was, did they really understand how to help small business with accessibility? And I thought about it and I thought about it. And as I went home that evening, I kept thinking, how do you really help small businesses understand accessibility? And as I sat kind of pondering that evening and preparing my summary to give back to the team the next day, a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson came to my mind that really helped sum up what I was thinking. And it was: a great challenge of life is knowing enough to know that you're right, but not knowing enough to know when you're wrong. And in this case, I thought they really understood accessibility. The part, ironically, considering the company that we worked with, is that they didn't really have a good understanding of how to tie those pieces together. So they were right about accessibility in the list that they pulled together about how businesses use it. Where the disconnect was happening was, how do you take that and apply it to a small business? And to really understand this, you have to kind of look at what I think a lot of people assume about small businesses, that they are little big businesses, meaning that they're the same as big businesses, except everything has been scaled down. They make less money, they have less revenues, they have fewer employees, but there's a lot of nuance that goes into that to help that small businesses go through, that we can understand better in order to help small businesses understand accessibility better. And to help you all sort of understand where I'm coming from, I want to tell my own personal small business story. And this story starts before I even understood the difference between a small business and a big business. In fact, I would argue I didn't really understand that this was a business at all, because it was my grandfather. And my grandfather never finished high school. And in order to make ends meet for his family, he started a construction company. Now, we would go to his house every summer to help him run this business, meaning we were free labor, and he used us to get all the extra tasks done around that his employees couldn't get done. But what I witnessed was cash management and revenue and supply and demand and being able to schedule things that the business needed, all of the things that we would think about as a business. But as a kid, I didn't grasp it at the time. It took time and additional education about businesses before I could make that connection. But what I will tell you is he never really thought about technology. He never really thought about the tools that he needed other than the things that he used on a daily basis in his job as a construction contractor. Fast forward many years later, and I had the opportunity to get more acquainted with two types of businesses. One, your average everyday Main Street business, retail stores, people who sold the items out of their home, and startups. And I started to see a difference in how the startups raised money and how the Main Street companies raised capital. And it started to dawn on me at that point that there was a difference beyond just the size of these companies or how they were financed. And I think the thing that I would point out is when you're thinking about small business, keep in mind that small businesses are not just little big businesses. And I'm going to give you guys some ideas about what we get taught about small business. That's correct, but there's a lot of nuance behind it that if you understand that, it makes it much easier to communicate to those businesses about accessibility or any other type of technology that you need them to understand. And so let's talk a little bit about what we get told about small businesses and what that means. And so the first thing we hear a lot is that the definition of a small business is easy. The SBA terms a small business as any business that has less than 500 people. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of businesses that I don't think of as small that have 200 people. And so what does that number mean when you're talking about small businesses? And I'll get to that in just a second. The second thing is that there are a lot of small businesses. Currently in the United States, there's a little over 30 million businesses that we would term or we would categorize as small businesses. Now, these businesses could be from any industry, but they're categorized that way by the Small Business Administration, and they all have very similar needs when it comes to the tools that they use to run their business. Also, SMBs are a huge part of our economy. And in fact, if you think about the businesses that fall under this umbrella, they make up about 99% of the businesses in the United States. And last, there's also a lot of people that work for these small businesses. And so there's about 60 million people that we would say are employed by small businesses. And so when I say that small businesses are not just big businesses, really what I want you to take away from that is beyond those statistics that we get told all the time to sell the needs of the small business, what's really going on? And this is where, as an accessibility community, I want to teach you guys some things that have helped me understand small businesses when I need to communicate things to them about accessibility or the technology they should be using, how they should be approaching their business. And that goes to these things. So the first thing I will tell you is, even though there are a lot of small businesses, when we say small, it means really small. And so when I think of a small business now, I think of businesses that have fewer than 20 people. They don't have a lot of employees. They don't have a lot of resources to call on to get things done. Even beyond that, most of these small businesses are run by one person. And it's usually a sole proprietor. They do everything, or they try to do everything themselves. They don't have access to a team of people or even the expertise to get a lot of things done. And the 60 million that I talked about that are employed by that, that's just a big number. If you divide that by all of these companies that only have 20 people, it's a very fragmented number. So the number of employees is misleading. And so when you're talking about small businesses, think about there's a lot of people out there that are running businesses that just don't have a lot of people at their disposal. And they're not experts at everything. What I would say is they're experts at what they do. So if you talk about, there's a great entrepreneur in Houston that we know named Janice Jucker, who runs a company called Three Brothers Bakery. I've worked with her twice before on different things. She's a great baker, but she's not a website builder, or she's not a writer, And so when she's trying to run her business, she needs other people to help her with that. And I would go a step beyond that and say, she doesn't actually understand fully the audience that may be coming into her bakery beyond what is mandated by law when it comes to access and inclusion. And so when you start to work with these businesses, the first thing that you have to understand is the picture that typically gets painted of small businesses is only one part of the equation that we're looking at when we talk with them. So I like to say that the very small nature of these businesses creates what I call resource poverty, meaning we think they might be able to do things, or we think they might have access to things, but the management approach to these businesses is so very different that it almost calls for a different approach than what we would normally use with a larger business when we're talking about things like accessibility or inclusion, and how to get them, one, not only to understand it, but how do they include it as a part of their everyday operation in their business? So how do you go about helping these small businesses? And the first thing I would tell you is something that I think Molly touched on during her keynote, and that you've got to humanize this and think in terms of human beings behind the personas that we talk about. And I know in our jobs and in our role, we tend to abstract things out to these things we call personas and use that to build things, but it is so critical to be able to get in front of real people, to understand their struggles and their pain points so that you can build better solutions for them. And so I'm going to play a video for you guys that is from some of our owners that we've talked to, just to hear in their own words how they describe this.
We're still only doing 50% of our sales, but we're okay with that, knowing that we're still able to support, our smaller staff.
But still, we aren't at the same capacity we were, before everything started.
When it comes down to being able to pay your bills or not having that capability, you do whatever it takes to be able to come up with cash to pay your bills.
And we're trying to find every way we can to give people even some hours paid, because we want to help support our local economy, and we know that there are a lot of families struggling.
But one thing I can say that's good out of all of this, I do see the community working together a lot more.
Our town's been really good about supporting businesses, buying little gifts for people, just doing what they can.
We fully believe that small businesses, run this country and contribute to the economical, growth and stability of this country. If we can help other people, then, we're not only helping support our own business, but we're also helping support our community through small business.
And try to keep the money that we're earning, in our town, so that other businesses can stay open too.
Our community understands us, and we hear our community. I feel like they're also part of our environment.
It's been our policy from day one. If somebody comes into our restaurant and they don't have money to pay, we give them a free meal and a free drink.
In my opinion, it should be an innate part of human nature to work together and try to help one another to get everything that they want out of life, and it'll definitely be returned to you, in my opinion.
Without further ado, I'm so thrilled to announce that you are one of our winners of our $10,000 grant.
Wow, thank you so much.
Promotional, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What you're doing right now has fueled me, and it fuels every business owner that you touch. You just have to know that. So thank you.
I have seen that clip probably 50 times, and every time I see it, still get just short of a little teary, because when you sit on calls with owners and they talk about how they struggled during COVID and how hard it was for them to get access to capital to continue to run their business, they weren't actually concerned about themselves. Almost always it was about the people they employed, the communities that they served, or about the things that they wouldn't be able to do should their business not survive. And so I wanted to use this as a seed for the next part of the conversation that I wanted to have with you all, to talk about how we help as an accessibility community, small business. And the first thing I would tell you is working with niche audiences requires an innate approach to this is from a human perspective, meaning don't go into it with an assumption that a small business is one way or another. Take time out of your schedule to actually get to know them and to understand what they do and don't understand about accessibility, because every small business is different. And what I would tell you is we have collected at Hello Alice about 6 million grant applications where we read over and over again the types of problems that they suffer from or that they are experiencing. And we've also started to interview these people for other reasons, and we hear a lot of the same stories over and over again. So one of the things I would ask the audience, and only one person, just throw out, what do you guys think the number one thing that small businesses ask us for is, or ask us about? Well, you can't answer, Jill. Anybody? It's money. And one of the things that they ask us about over and over again is, how do I get capital to start? How do I get capital to can stay in business? How do I market my business? How do I build a website? So all of the things that we might typically think of, but they don't ask for a website, they ask for money. And I think this is a very important nuanced point to remember, is that small businesses think in terms of what they want and need. And when you're selling to them, and this is a point that I tell my employees about selling anything around technology, is think about what the person wants, and then you can build up to the need. To give you guys an example of this, when we are selling, let's say we're selling an ebook on how to build a branding system. Almost no small business comes to you with, how do I build a branding system? What they come and ask you for is a logo. And so if you start with what they want, and then you expose them to this larger universe of things that you know they need, it's a much easier sell. And so what I wanted to start you all with is, here's the 6 things that we hear the most from small businesses. And then I want to think a little bit about how we cast these against the accessibility background. So there's capital, there's revenue, how do I make money? How do I get information about any number of things? How do I find new opportunities for my business? How do I find customers? And then how do I improve my operations? And so the first question I would ask you all is, how can accessibility help their capital efforts? And here's what I would tell you is, what we tell people about accessibility or any other thing that we think they should do along with their businesses, we tell them how it impacts their ability to pitch their business to other people. So if you're talking to someone who is passionate about inclusion and accessibility, if your business understands that, it's a much better pitch to that audience. And so you're building a more well-rounded pitch about your business. The second thing is revenue. And this one is actually much easier for us, because we can talk about how accessibility opens up channels, not just for people with disabilities, but it makes things easier for the entire audience that they're trying to reach. And not only that, they can actually get more revenue if they're able to reach more people by making their business or their technology more accessible. The third question I would ask is, what information can you give them about accessibility? And most of the time, you've got to start at a very low level with people with accessibility. You can't jump right in and say, here's all of these things you need to go change on your website. Here's all of these things that you need to change about how you produce PDFs, how you remediate documents, all of that stuff. You can't throw that at a small business owner because they usually don't understand all of this stuff, and you've got to start small. My approach with this has always been to start by building a relationship with them based on what they asked us for. So we do these sessions where our grant winners can sign up to do mentor sessions with one of the executives on our team. And almost always someone comes to me and they want to know something about user experience, something about how do I market a website, or how do I build a website. And so if they ask me about user experience, I almost always frame that conversation from the accessibility lens. And I talk about how do you know who your whole audience is. And the refreshing thing is most of the times when you introduce people to this, they've never really thought about it because they're thinking only in terms of the customer that they've envisioned, which may not be all inclusive. But when you explain it to them, it's much easier to get them to buy into the things that we're going to tell them they need to do to make their products and the experience of working with their company more accessible and inclusive. Then we talk about opportunities. And we talk about how software that has been built to be more inclusive, or a website that's more inclusive, gives them other opportunities outside of the ones that they may have originally envisioned for their business. And so these are the 4 most important ones. Then we get to customer, which I think sits in a bucket all by itself. Most of the time they don't understand that their customer market is much broader than it is. And I actually have started to tell people that more people probably have disabilities than you think. They may not even be aware of the disability that they have. And you should broaden your perspective, especially as we have more and more people doing things like spending a lot of time in front of computers. We talk about how people have temporary disabilities because of a certain situation or scenario that may have happened with them, and how they need to be preparing for that type of an audience. And then from an operational standpoint, this typically focuses on the people that they hire and the things that they need to do to make accommodations for people who may have a disability that work for them, and what they should be doing and what they need to understand. What almost always happens in all of these cases, especially, and this is great for you guys out there who run agencies or who are consultants, I have found in my career, the more you tell people for free and the more you educate them, it almost always results in more business for you, because they now trust you and they feel like you can keep them on the right path as long as you're helping them with it, and it's framed in a way that makes sense for them. This is the biggest slide in the what we want to do for them. The next thing is, don't assume that they know or understand all of this stuff. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but the thing that will surprise most people when you sit down and talk to a small business owner is they're very receptive. They almost never turn you away. And a lot of us that have dealt with selling accessibility to bigger businesses always have dealt with the red pen that comes across the accessibility line. And I think when you work with small businesses, they're less apt to do that type of thing because they are early in their business in many cases, and they want to make sure that they're serving a wide audience. So I think making sure that you address this from the standpoint of they may not know, let me try to educate them on what's going on, is the easiest way to make sure they get the accessibility mission. And then this is one that, as I thought about this and I was thinking about the parallels between what we deal with in the accessibility community and what we deal with in our company and other companies that serve small businesses, is that you have to include your target when you're planning out a solution. It's very difficult to build solutions, and I don't think I have to tell this to this audience, but it's difficult to build solutions for people that you've never talked to or that you haven't really had a conversation with about their pain points. And small business owners, I will tell you, will listen to you, and they will be receptive, and they'll answer questions and give you suggestions about what they deal with in their business that will help you frame the accessibility solutions or approach that you think that they should be taking. My next point is start with the positives instead of negatives. And this is actually a sales tactic that I learned from a former boss of mine, is to always start with the positives and then bring in the negatives under that banner, because you don't want people saying no right away. What you want to do is get them started down the positive path. So in this case, I would say coming in with the wooden stick on their hand and saying your site's inaccessible isn't the best opening. You could teach them about what they could be doing to gain more audience, gain more customers, or to improve their operations, or to get more sales if they fix the problems that you see or that they address the issues that they have on their website. This is probably my favorite one, and I think this applies to more than just when we're dealing with technology or accessibility. And the frame I always give people to think about when I say goal time versus tool time. And I'll use this presentation as an example. Goal time is the time that I spent thinking about the outline and what I was going to say and making sure I had all the resources. Tool time is formatting the slides and making sure there's a good contrast. You should spend significantly more time when you're talking with a business owner or anyone on the goal time and what they're trying to accomplish versus the tools. And this is really critical for those of us who come from technical background and we work with the tools all the time. That is usually not what people understand. They understand the goals. And if we get them down the path of the tools too fast, they aren't as focused on the goals as they need to be. Another great example is my daughter is starting a business, and she came to me and I didn't ask her or her friends for their business plan. I just asked, hey, what are you going to do to start this business? And they spent like 15 minutes naming off all the equipment they wanted and how they wanted to find this great studio space and what color it was going to be. And I was like, well, how are you going to find customers? And how are you going to sell this? And they hadn't thought about that. They had thought about all of the other stuff. And I think it's very similar when you're talking to people about solving problems about accessibility or any other technologies. Get them focused on the goal. And if that goal is framed in terms of the things that you know they want, this is a much easier conversation to have with them. And then create tools that help build understanding. For us, we build what we call milestones or guides to educate people on a topic that we think they should know. Almost always it's easier to do this in bite-sized chunks. So don't throw everything at people all at once. What you should do is break it up into a toolkit or a set of information that you think they can consume and understand over time until they get the full understanding. And it's also a great way to sell anything that you think goes along with this. So if I were going to tell someone about accessibility today, I would probably not talk about web standards or HTML or CSS. What I would do is give them a story about someone who these tools help. I wouldn't tell them about all the stuff they need to change. I would tell them about the outcome that they get once they've made these changes. And it's a subtle difference between how I originally, when Sharon first taught us about accessibility, we were all gung-ho to do this. But I think as time passed and I had some experience not only selling to accessibility, but also understanding how people responded to it, I started to change my approach, especially with small businesses, because they simply just don't have the budget to do these things. Next, I think we're all gung-ho to do this, is sharing your accessibility experience and expertise. I will talk to small businesses a lot about what we offer, but I will frame it in terms of the things that I've experienced with the tools that they're asking me for or the solutions that they're asking me for. And they're always really receptive and they ask for examples. So have some examples ready for them. Make sure you frame it in terms of human beings or what that experience is like versus tools or things that they have to do. And the last thing I would say is check in with owners and employees. This is actually one of my favorite things to do. In fact, one of the things we just finished doing is we split our company into 3 teams and we sent everybody out on a scavenger hunt, and they had to do everything through small business. What it forced our employees to do is to actually engage with the people that we serve so they could learn more about them. Excuse me. And it informs how we approach things, whether it's helping them with funding or helping them with technology, including accessibility. It helps our employees understand it better versus me coming in as a VP and saying, this is what small businesses experience. They actually get to see it firsthand. It's really important to check in, not just with the owners, but with the employees, because in many cases, the employees are closer to the day-to-day work or things that are a problem. And so they can give you really, really good insights about the problems the business is experiencing that you can help translate into a solution, whether it's through their website or other. And so I want to finish up by going back to these principles of products that people love. The technology should be transparent. And one of the things that we talk about at our company is, how do you make sure the technology is transparent for everyone that might potentially use it? And understanding how you do that and how that might impact a small business who doesn't have the same, 30 developers on their team that we have. And how do you make sure that you've done this from the perspective of the small business's experience working with those customers? And so thank you again. This is one of the topics that I'm very passionate about, especially as I have learned over the years that small businesses simply operate differently, and how we have to operate differently to not only introduce them to inclusivity and accessibility, but also to help them make those steps so that they one day become a big business. And the other thing that I would call out here is a lot of us work with vendors or technologies that small businesses use. And so sort of the back way that we have started to look at this is the partners that we work with, we introduce them to how they can build better technology that helps small businesses. So for example, instead of us trying to help 700,000 small businesses build a website, we can go to a Shopify or a WordPress and say, hey, here's some things that you can do, because the small businesses simply won't go find these resources because they don't know. And if we can get them to start with tools that are already accessible, we're a long ways down that road that we don't have to worry about just by introducing basic tools that have already been through the cycle. And I wanted to leave some time for questions. Sure. Okay. So they missed the $1 million prize. Okay. Awesome. You look like you're going to ask a question. Awesome. What's the meaning of what? Yeah. If there is anyone online, there's a bunch in the chat here. If anyone online wants to unmute and ask a question, we can do that as well. Here's one question we have is, how do you contend with out-of-the-box website companies that promise they'll take care of everything for the small business owner, including accessibility, and then do not? My honest answer is I don't recommend those tools, largely because it creates more work for me anyway. And I think if you're honest with that's actually not what we contend with. Because at the end of the day, the small business owner doesn't know the tools. What we actually contend with is, I have no time to do this, or this thing promised me that I'm going to be able to make money, because I'm going back to what I know their baseline concern is. Those 6 things is what we talk about all the time. It's never the tool, it's always the why behind it. And so what we try to do is we focus on pushing them in a direction that helps them answer that why and what we believe to be the best possible way, versus just recommending a tool. Like, we might get a small business owner that says, my son said I should build my site on Wix, right? And so we have to have enough information about using Wix or Shopify or one of the other off-the-shelf tools that they could use to make that the discussion. What usually ends up happening with small businesses that blows their mind is someone says, you need to build this thing from scratch. You need to build this on, let's say it's WordPress from scratch. All they see in their head is expenses and dollar signs. And so what you have to do is understand like where they're coming from and what they're going to reject. And if you've got a small business that's trying to survive, pitching them a $50,000 website is not going to go over really well. Jillian?
Uno, dos, tres. Whoa. Okay. Kelsey, I want to first thank you so much for this presentation. So incredibly insightful. One of the big struggles that I have is small businesses and accessibility is kind of like talking about the problem of poverty, of world hunger. It's like this big problem. And so the idea of accessibility becomes this big problem. And one of the things that I love from my conversations with you is that you bring it down and you really focus on the things that people can do immediately. So anyone that is listening to this, what are 3 things that you could tell someone, action steps that they can take immediately after leaving your keynote, for things that they can immediately do as small businesses to prioritize accessibility?
As a small business or as someone serving a small business?
Both.
Okay. So the 3 things I would say that you could do as a small business is seek out an expert. Now, this is a recommendation I make to small businesses all the time, because I think in many cases, it happens with small businesses and startups is they try this lone wolf approach. Like, I'm going to go solve the problems all by myself. Nobody solves their problems by themselves. Like, it's a myth that you can do that by yourself. So seek out an expert who can be a mentor or a guide for you as you're making these decisions. So imagine if you know nothing about technology and you're trying to pick a tool to build a website. You need someone to give you some guidance. The second thing I would tell them is make sure they're realistic about the expenses that they're going to have for their businesses that they may not have thought about. And almost always everyone underestimates what I would call the website and marketing bucket. Like, they don't really understand what they should put into that bucket. And that's where the expert comes in. The last piece I would do is ask people who are your customers what you can do for them. Because most of the time, if you ask people, they'll tell you. But if you don't ask them and you don't do it, that's when you run into issues with what you're serving them. So that's on the small business side. On our side, of the people who are serving these small businesses, I think the first thing you have to do is get to know small businesses better, because they are significantly different than the large companies we work with. They have, so, and I kind of covered a lot of that in the presentation, but when you talk to them, you just realize how different it is for them, and build a toolkit of things that you know work for them that meet your needs as a technology provider, and from an accessibility standpoint that you can call on to use when you're working with a small business. That was a compound question. Thank you.
Hi there. Oh, super hot. Hello, Jillian here, longtime Access U attendee, first time keynote question asker. So I just want to restate 3 facts before I throw out a hypothesis/question. Fact number 1 that you said in your presentation, that small business owners make up a large chunk of our economy. Fact number 2, small business owners are generally experts at what they're selling or providing, and not necessarily technology or digital solutions. Fact number 3, small business owners don't have a lot of time. Time is a luxury for a lot of small business owners. So my hypothesis then would be, if we're going to make the most impact for small business owners to create accessible experiences, the responsibility doesn't or shouldn't lie on the small business owner 100%, other than awareness. The responsibility should be on the tools they use to make their businesses go. So low code solutions, maybe DIY kits that they can purchase from their web providers. So with that hypothesis, what can we do to make companies or rally companies like Shopify, like Wix, like ThemeForest, like all of these different solutions, even like FreshBooks or accounting software that sends out invoices to their customers? What can we do to make these companies make accessibility a priority?
Let me stay in front of the mic. One thing I did not mention in all of the stuff about Hello Alice and how we help companies, last year, I think we did $23 million in grants. So those grants didn't all come from us. Some of those grants came from big companies that have a definite interest in helping small businesses. So that is actually where I think the twist happens. And it's not just give them money to fund their business. It's actually going to some of these companies that are willing to give away grant money, have them invest in better technology too, because they're already interested in helping the small businesses, as demonstrated by their willingness to provide grant money to them. But on the flip side, how about making your tools better for the small business? Here's what I would say. What I anticipate happening is that they have to invest, that the cost of tools would go up, but don't raise the price of the tools just because you had to put some extra work in. Do the extra work so that it makes it easy for these small businesses to do what we're promising them, which is an easier path to business success. And I can't tell if everyone can hear the audience questions on the mic. Okay. It says they cannot hear the audience questions. And this is online.
Well, if you'll repeat them, please, sir.
Hello, so, oh, wow, that's loud. I'm Jonathan. I work at the U.S. Department of Labor, and obviously we have a great interest in helping small businesses be accessible. Something we've noticed is that also a lot of times small business owners get overwhelmed by regulatory requirements or by, the state says this, the federal government says that. And I was wondering how you've incorporated that into your assistance, into the work that you do with small businesses, helping them navigate these oftentimes complicated landscapes.
So let me repeat your question just so I understand it in the audience can hear. So how do we incorporate regulatory or legislative requirements into this approach for small business? Is that? How do you help them navigate those requirements? This is actually something that we are working on right now because it actually started when we as a company had to start working on our SOC 2 Type 2 requirements and PCI and CCPA. And I started to think about these requirements are for all companies, and there's no way a small business, a single business owner is going to be able to navigate all of this stuff around cybersecurity, privacy, and still be able to run a business, because it's difficult for me to keep track of that stuff, and I have a staff that helps me with it. So one of the things that we recommend is there's a couple of companies that we work with that specifically work with small businesses on things like cybersecurity and privacy. But again, I think this also goes back to the tools that they use, doing a better job with educating them on this. And so, for example, if you have a company like MailChimp, where they're using it to manage their mailing list, MailChimp can build a different area of their website to help small businesses understand the ramifications of collecting email addresses and what you have to do around privacy. So there are companies that specialize in that, but as a consultant, I think if you could put together a small guide of any type to kind of introduce them to those things, so at least they're aware, and also be aware of which types of businesses are most impacted by this. So if they're collecting payments online, for example, point them toward a solution where the credit card data and anything that needs to be encrypted or stored in a private way is not stored on their servers, it's stored somewhere else, so that they can kind of, at least temporarily, not have to deal with SOC 2 or PCI requirements.
We're right about at the end. We got time for one more question. Okay. Okay, we've pushed the start time back, so we'll continue questions as long as you have them. As a reminder, if you're online, you can unmute briefly, ask your question, and then mute again.
If you're online and you have a question, you can also unmute and ask questions. Awesome. No more questions. Thanks again. If you guys have any questions, sharing the slides, when I give them over, they'll be available along with the recording, right? Okay. So, and if you have questions, I will also give my contact information, because sometimes you think of things after the fact. And thanks for having me. It's been great being back here at Access U. Well, we always have a saying, it's Jillian's fault. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of it comes from having worked with startups and seeing the wrong way. And then you figure it out. I think really the big thing right now, and it's not necessarily in the accessibility bucket, but the question around cybersecurity and privacy is a huge, huge one coming up now with all of the changes that are being legislated in many states. California, everyone knows about, but there's like 8 other states that are this close to passing similar legislation. So, and it's just not something small businesses would even think to keep up with. Big businesses do it because they don't want to get sued, but small businesses have the same requirements. No problem.